Welcome to the Public Works Nerds Podcast with Mark and Mike.
Welcome to the Public Works Nerds Podcast. I'm Mike Spack.
I'm Mark Culver.
And we're your co-hosts. Today we're talking about different ways to collect and use transportation data with Deb Heiser, who's been the engineering director at the City of St. Louis Park, Minnesota since 2013. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in here. I don't usually do this, but we were just talking about this before this episode started. We're probably going to end up talking about more than just what the topic is. I think this is going to be a fun episode, so I'm looking forward to it. But and Deb was my predecessor at City Roosevelt, so I kind of feel this like kindred connection with Deb, and we've known each other for a long time. But tell us about yourself.
It should be noted that Mike Spack was a previous resident. So he actually is a St. Louis Park alumnus and provided me quite an insight into what's going on in the Sorensen neighborhood. So who am I? My name's Deb Heiser. I've been an engineer now since, oh my gosh, it's been almost 30 years. I started my career, I went to the University of Minnesota, go Gophers. And I started my career at the city of Burnsville. So I've worked for the public sector my whole career. So I was able to draft and I did GIS, and then I made my way into development review, and I learned everything I needed to know about land use, PUDs, CUPs. I can do some more acronyms if you'd like. I had an excellent opportunity in 1998 to go to the City of Roseville, which was where my heart was. I grew up in Arden Hills, and to start working right next door. To start working for a city where I knew when, that was the Rose Drive-In. I used to hang out at Rosedale, and to really start working for a community that I knew so well. And actually, I ran into some ex-boyfriends' parents and some of my friends. But needless to say, I learned so much. I became the city engineer at the city of Roseville in 2001 when the public works director left to go to the private sector, and never looked back. Did a lot of great things in Roseville. But then I had an excellent opportunity in 2013. The City of St. Louis Park had an opening for the engineering director. They have the standalone engineering department in St. Louis Park, and serving as the city engineer / engineering director for St. Louis Park, I was able to shape a new department. Mm-hmm. St. Louis Park is a city of about 50,000, a little under, but about 50,000, 10 square miles, just located to the west of the city of Minneapolis. If you blink, you may think you're in Edina. If you blink, you may think you're in Minneapolis. Okay. Hopkins is close by, as is Golden Valley. We've got some really odd borders in St. Louis Park, but it's an amazing community. The council's very progressive, very supportive, wanting to do a lot of things, very supportive of infrastructure investment. Replacing our roads, replacing our water mains, replacing sanitary sewer, building new infrastructure. We have a very aggressive bikeways, sidewalks, and trails plan to build out 30 miles of bikeways in the city. And that was one of the first projects that we started back in 2013, and incorporating all of that into our transportation infrastructure projects. So yeah, I've been there. It's been wonderful. And Mike moved out of the city. So what does that tell you?
You drove him away.
But before we hit record on the podcast, you were talking a little bit about, you've been in the public sector your whole career, and that's been a very conscious decision. And it was fun the way you phrased it. So why don't you put that on the record?
Well, I've been in my public sector. I've been an owner. I call it an owner. Mm. So when you look at what we do in the public sector, those decisions that we make, we live with.
Right.
And eventually, if we make a bad decision, we're going to have to fix it. I always say that, we're here to be responsive to residents. We're here to fix problems. And again, that's probably the biggest reason why I am working as a city engineer. I love to fix problems. And that ownership and that ability to say, that one-way street, that's something that we need to look at. Those stop signs there, are those really something we should have? We need to make this safer. And then eventually when those changes happen, it does take time. Mm-hmm. You look back and just see all the ways you've made the city safer. Mm-hmm. You've made it better for bikes, peds, for transit, for vehicles, and making that infrastructure investment that future Deb, which is the person who will replace me eventually, will say, she did good. We did good. We're in a good place because there were good decisions.
Yeah, and you also had a fun turn of phrase of a gift to your future self.
Yes, yes.
Of maybe the hard decisions or the hard work today is going to pay off in the future, and you're gonna either reap what you sow in a bad way or a good way with that mentality.
So, but yeah, so that's just a little bit about myself. Again, I highly recommend the public sector. It is very rewarding. I will, retire very likely from the city of St. Louis Park as long as, something doesn't happen. But I speak very highly of the public sector and anybody who's very interested in working for the public. It's incredibly rewarding. We have residents that bring cookies out for our field staff. It's about listening. It's about, and I say this with traffic stuff quite a bit. That person who calls you with a traffic concern or a drainage concern or whatever, that person may only have one opportunity to interact with you or your staff or the city. And it's important that you listen. You don't have to say yes all the time. It's important you listen. It's important you respond. And being responsive doesn't mean saying yes. It's talking about, it's working through the question, listening, and giving them a response in a timely manner. So,
yeah, I in my time in the public sector, I found that too. It's a lot of times you actually gain an ally, even if the person is really upset. Sometimes it's just, hey, let them vent.
Yep.
Listen to them, let them vent, let them get it out. I found sometimes it was like if the resident got my voicemail and they would just scream in the voicemail, you'd call them back and they'd be, yeah, because they got it out. They just had their moment. But then you have a reasonable, logical conversation with them about why you can't do something. 9 times out of 10, they're going to understand that. And then you've gained an ally.
Well, and you bring this up, and I try to talk to my staff about this. We have a world where you can tweet and you can blog and you can, put on public stuff or what is it? The Fix-It, any of those Fix-It apps. And at the end of the day, a phone call is personal. If you can talk to that person on the phone, you can craft the most perfect email, but that's not necessarily getting at what the it is. And I always say this, what is their it? And we'll be talking about traffic, but a lot of times people call with something and it may be something completely different. And there's something else you can do that maybe is a yes, turning it into a yes where, I want a stop sign. Well, I can't help you with that. But a yes may be, okay, you're concerned about this. Well, what about putting out a speed board? What about having added patrols? What about people can't see the stop sign? Why don't we trim the trees? Why don't we, there's things we can do, and finding that, making it a yes, and whatever that looks like.
And one of my favorite phrases getting at that, it's not even a question, it's just tell me more.
Yep.
And just
tell me more.
Letting people keep talking. And you could say, tell me more 3 times. And people will just keep going because often it's not the first thing that comes out of their mouth. That's the root issue.
Yeah. And as engineers, I love problem solving. A lot of times I'm like, I'm going to fix this, right?
Right.
And a lot of times they aren't looking for a fix. They're just looking for someone to listen. And so that's...
Yeah. You touched on your department and the fact that you've been able to, mold this department. Talk about your staff, the size of your staff, kind of the breakdown of it. And that.
Well, so when I got there, so engineering was a brand new department when I started 10 years ago. We had been a part of Public Works, but there was a reorganization, and Public Works was moved into those operational functions were moved into a different department. And engineering became a standalone department. Part of the reasoning behind it was that our focus is this public process. Our focus is building things. We have to focus on making sure what we build is maintainable. Absolutely. No. But, that is just so much of what we do, right-of-way permits, all of those things. So when I first started, we had a staff, I believe, of 9. And really sitting back, and this is part of that organizational development, what is the right structure, what seats in the bus and who should fill them.
Yep.
Really looked at who we had there and what did we need. High expectations from the council. So we now are a staff of 14. I'm the engineering director. I have we have an administrative assistant who takes care of everything, which, and she is very good at her job and keeping us in line and knowing what's going on. She's a touch point. She touches every project. We have 3 project engineers. One of them is an engineering services manager. And that position takes care of anything from the outside, from the public. So, or an application. So development review, stormwater. the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan program, right-of-way permits, spin scooters in the right-of-way. It's always a fun one. Anything from MnDOT and that sort of thing. So just really kind of interacting and working through that. I have a engineering project manager who oversees transportation, and his focus is transit, Southwest LRT.
That's a big one right now.
Yes, it's a very coordinating everything with Southwest LRT. It was taking a little longer than we planned. The bikeway, sidewalk, and trail plan, so building new infrastructure and making those connections. He addresses any concerns about traffic or transportation in the city. He also does master planning. We're working on a Safe Streets and Roads for All comprehensive safety action plan. We just recently received a grant for that. And he really is kind of the strategic thinker, looking at how this all interacts. My other engineering project manager is really oversees all of our construction projects, developing specs, developing standards, as-built, making sure that everything kind of works in tandem, moving projects forward, consistency, all those things, and does a very good job of it. All of them do a very good job. I didn't mean to single one out. Are you listening? Anyway, so. And then, of course, we can't do our jobs. So engineers sit in the office. We don't always just sit in the office, but they don't let me out very often. We can't do our jobs without our field staff. And so we have 3 project coordinators, and they are the leads. They're the people that are out there every single day with the local street reconstruction projects. And when the neighbor on the corner can't get out of their driveway or has a medical appointment, there's water main building, that's the phone number that they call. And those are the ones that get the cookies. And just making sure those projects work forward well. The contractors are doing what they say they do. They're getting it done on time. And so I have 3 project coordinators, and that's their job. They get assigned the big projects, the small projects, the sidewalk replacements, those sorts of things. We have a project engineer that oversees our local reconstruction. We do about 4.5 miles of road reconstruction, about 2 to 2.5 miles of water main reconstruction here. And he designs that all in-house. We all have, he takes care of all the specs or all the design on that and all the public process. And he's amazing. He takes care of stuff, and we'll talk about him. You've met him, Mike. And then we have an engineering technician to kind of help out, and another tech who does all right-of-way permits. We do about 700 to 900, depending on the workload of right-of-way permits a year. Wow. And she is also doing support for Jack for the Southwest LRT, because there's meetings there's meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays where we just try to coordinate stuff. Road closures, all of the above. And then we have a GIS. We have somebody who does information systems. We have somebody who's an in-house tech who takes care of all the hard work for the traffic requests. About half his time is responding to traffic requests, and using the data we're going to be talking about. And getting at that. And then finally, make sure and then Eric, we have a water resources manager, and with stormwater being such a critical part of all of our lives, and with the rules changing, we have one person that he manages a grant program for the community. He manages all of our stormwater maintenance projects, our stormwater infrastructure projects. And that's kind of the makeup. It's a lot of stuff to coordinate.
So how many people is that? Because you said 14.
Yeah, 14. Yeah.
So let's talk about kind of the neighborhood reconstruction project side. Why don't you explain the situation and how that all evolved?
Yeah. So, at the end of the day, we reconstruct streets once every 30 years. Okay. Once every 30 years, we have an opportunity to measure twice, cut once. So one of the things the council asked us to do as a priority is to listen to the residents. And so when we start engaging, we listen and, what do you see? We have to rebuild this road. We have to rebuild the water main. What do you see as being a need in this neighborhood? So we listened. One of the things that has been always a challenge is traffic management and traffic calming. And I know that there's a lot of communities out there that have, standalone programs with traffic calming, but probably the best time to do any of this, whether it's build sidewalks, replace water main, that opportunity where we're coming in, we're rebuilding the road, touch the road once, and then don't touch it for 30 years. Mm-hmm. Instead of coming in and retrofitting something, is a lot more flexible.
Yeah.
So we had heard from the community, heard from the neighborhood concerns about speeding. We'd heard from the community and neighborhood concerns about cut through traffic, trucks. We also had a concern from our fire department. So we have a fire station located in this neighborhood that had a one-way street. So if you can imagine, for leaving, the fire department could only leave one way. And so we had talked, and there was another private road that everybody's using as a cut through on, it was cutting through the church parking lot, right? So we saw this as an opportunity to figure out what we could do as a part of the project. And it was kind of cool. I mean, it was aggressive, and we started with just kind of an idea, and we met with a consultant. His name was Mike Spack. And
Mike's back?
Spack. And we just kind of said, this is what we're thinking. And we developed a program, we developed a plan to first and foremost collect the data.
Yeah.
Right?
So there
We heard the concerns and then collect the data.
Yep. Heard the big concerns, had half a dozen concerns about traffic patterns within the neighborhood. And the neighborhood had 60 to 70 block faces. And we decided, kind of in this measure twice, cut once, like, hey, we could do experiments. And so Deb, this is amazing. Deb was open to this because I haven't heard of people doing it to the scale we did in this neighborhood. And I know you've done more of this after this project. We went out, blanketed the neighborhood, and put out tube counters on every block face and collected speed, volume, classification data at these 60 points, and took some turning movement counts at key intersections. Then we talked through neighborhood meetings, kind of design charrettes. Okay, listen to the neighborhood and dive into what could we do. Then working with Deb and the engineering staff came up with, here's what we think is the right answer.
After you collected the data and you compared that to the complaints and the concerns that you had before, like how many of them were proven valid? You know what I mean?
Well, and again, the speed stuff was not. I mean, there were the perception of the speeding. One of the things is we had. I remember your charts that we had. We had all these spreadsheets, and it was red if it was over the speed limit. And
you're just a red, yellow, green guy.
It kind of makes sense.
It was all red, yellow, green. And at the end of the day, the speed concern was perceived. As far as we even at that point were using 85th percentile speed, and so. Just looking at the perception of speed. We did have absolutely cut through traffic. Yeah. The concern about truck cut through traffic and trucks on Brunswick was a real concern. And just to let you know, this is a parallel route. We have a state aid route called Alabama, and there's a parallel route called Brunswick that is more intuitive to drive down.
Yes.
And even though there's signs that say no trucks, this is the route that a lot of trucks were taking. And that was a concern that cut through traffic. The volumes of people that were using that private road were high. I mean, the people cutting through the parking lot, the church parking lot were high. And part of the reason for that is the way that this one way was in play. And surprisingly, no one was concerned about the road one way. I mean, there's a couple people in the neighborhood. A lot of people wanted to stay in place.
Yeah.
But the amount of traffic going through the private property was really high, considering that it's a church and they have a daycare, and that's a concern for a public use of a private.
More than 100 cars a day cutting.
And then there's also the cut through there was a private road just to the north of the one way, and that private road just to the north one way was high. People were using that because it was they couldn't go into the neighborhood using the one way. They used the private road, and that was a concern for those townhomes.
Yeah, and so we laid out the tube counters. Heard the concerns, figured out the data of what was really happening, and then came up with a plan of how could we make adjustments.
Yeah. Well, let me just build on, you brought up the charrette. And this was fun. Actually, I actually heard from some residents afterwards, they felt it was cathartic. We actually sat residents down with maps of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And
big aerials.
I mean, pretty much the presentation was 15 minutes. And then we broke them all out into these small groups. I think there's about 40 people at that one.
Yeah.
And they had maps, and it showed where the stop signs were, and it showed the one-ways and et cetera and so on. And they got to just draw on the maps and circle intersections and say, the crossing here, crosswalks here, and traffic here, and it was really well received.
Yeah, lots of Post-it notes, lots of markers, just write down on the maps. And I mean, we had 4 or 5 copies of these kind of table by table. So people would move around and talk to their neighbors. And what did you put down? And it really became interactive.
Yeah. So anyway, so you can talk data now.
Yeah. So then we had the data and we talked about what changes could we make. And we decided to run a temporary experiment and collect the data while the experiment was running. So Deb's staff, the public works staff, put orange barrels, orange cones. We changed signs temporarily to make all of these changes. We blockaded off the cut through through the church parking lot. So basically, as engineers, we're usually just making an educated guess, but it's still here's our analysis, here's what we're going to do, and here's what we're going to build, and that's what gets built. This was let's make all the changes with the cones, let traffic settle down for a week to let the commuters figure out what their normal patterns were going to be. Then we collected data again at all of the same locations, and we did comparisons of all the speeds, the truck traffic, the volumes, how did things change? And then we did it. I think we decided some of the traffic circles weren't needed, and we pulled those out.
Yep. And I think so the wonderful thing about this pilot, and we were calling it a traffic management pilot project. And so that's what we've been calling them with our projects, is that not only can you measure twice, cut once with the community, but we also had fire. Fire drove the traffic circles. You know, we had some bump-ins, some not chicanes, but some narrowing.
Yeah. Yep.
And so we actually had every vehicle that we could drive through, and we adjusted the size of the neighborhood traffic circles. We did some modeling before we set these things up too, because there were a couple of things that fell on the cutting room floor.
Yes.
We were actually going to try to open up a cul-de-sac, and there was a couple other ideas that came out there, but we finally just decided, what is the least impactful for the neighborhood. So then we ran the experiment. I think we collected data twice after we implemented. And at the end of the day, the numbers were 2 of the traffic circles made no difference. The speeds, the types of vehicles that were using it, there was no difference. But that cut through, that Brunswick, reduced speeds, the trucks weren't going down there anymore, which was our goal. We want the trucks to stay on that state aid route. We want them to stay on Alabama. And so when it all came down to this traffic study that the SPAC put together for us, we made our recommendations based on what fixed it, what made a difference. And that's why just these pilot projects, oh my gosh, it was like the coolest, biggest experiment I've done, or we had done. And I think it was well received by the community. And, certainly there were people who didn't support what we were doing, but there were a lot of people that really supported our willingness to try.
I just want to touch on the logistics of the trials. And you said you used cones. I mean, did you really just use cones?
Well, I'm trying to remember because we've refined it since. We had a sign in the middle, so we delineated it out.
The traffic circle.
The traffic circle.
Yep.
And we used the tall
pylons.
The
pylons. Yep.
What we did with the last one we did, we actually used the socks that you use for erosion control.
Yeah.
And that's how we made the circle. And then we did the signs in the middle again. We had a couple cones, but not really. But we actually kind of made a curb out of erosion control sock.
Yeah.
But I think that, if somebody hits it, it's a cone.
Well, right. And I guess, did you have any instances of vandalism or people moving things or anything like that?
And first one, no, we didn't.
Okay.
We had a lot of people turning left where they shouldn't be turning left, even though we had the right signage. The right signage.
The correct signage.
The correct signage. That's
that points to the right.
Yeah, points to the right. But no, we on this particular one, we didn't have anyone mess with it, which was really, really cool.
That is cool.
We have had people mess with things.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
One thing I want to give Deb a lot of credit for, there were a couple of residents in the neighborhood who, I'm trying to politely phrase this, but pretty belligerent. And they didn't vandalize the experiment, but they were very vocal at every meeting we had. And one thing I think made a huge difference we had follow-up public meetings with here's how things are working. Here's the data we're sharing. Here's adjustments we're going to make. It was amazing communication with the residents in the neighborhood. But Deb brought in a meeting facilitator where most of the other public meetings I've been in, and it's been the engineering staff being the facilitator.
Yep.
So you're acting as a facilitator
And the expert.
at the same time. And can you talk a little bit?
Oh yeah. So if you're not using a facilitator for difficult public meetings, or not even just for difficult, we are engineers.
We do things well.
We do things really well.
Yeah.
And we have very good engineers. I mean, in St. Louis Park, we have very good engineers, very good at doing presentations and all of the above. But to have somebody else there that is the person who ensures that if someone raises their hand, they're heard, or sets the ground rules,
Yep.
walks around with a microphone, is there as a outside party, it does so much. It just does so much. And so we had switched to that in 2017. We had a really challenging project on Texas Avenue, and really started to do that facilitator. And I swear by it, as far as these real challenging projects, especially when, everybody, I love my job. And when you come into somebody's neighborhood and you are there to change, some people love the change.
Yeah.
Other people don't. So how do you work through that? How do you work through, here's what we, I'm with the government, I'm here to help. No.
Right.
But
Right.
how do
Trust
you, how do you work through that and listen? Well, having this person who's there to ensure that happens.
Just out of curiosity, from an average or general perspective, just so people kind of get a something in their mind on this, how much do you think that facilitator added to the cost of the project?
To be honest, the facilitator, we had 3 or 4 public meetings. We would have a prep meeting with the facilitator, and then the actual meeting themselves. I can't imagine more than $2,500.
Wow. Yeah. And such a small cost for something that probably get a lot of benefit on. So that's great.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, just wanted to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Bolton & Mink, who are producing this podcast for us.
At Bolton & Mink, we believe all people should live in a safe, sustainable, and beautiful community. We promise every client 2 things. We'll work hard for you, and we'll do a good job. We take a personal interest in the work being done around us. And at the end of the day, we're real people offering real solutions.
Okay, so you did this. I feel like I have 2 guests now. That's
like
okay.
what you do.
That's okay. I just don't have a script for so you did all this. You found the elements that worked, the elements that didn't work, and so then I imagine you go back to your residents and say, okay, this is what we found, and this is what we're going to do. Was there more buy-in at that point because people kind of lived it, like they
I believe there was.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, there was some skepticism, even that this would make a difference with the traffic circles. And when we came forward and said, yeah, these don't make a difference, but these do.
Yeah.
And that was our recommendation. We did not recommend 2 of the traffic circles because they didn't change the behavior. We brought forward the recommendations to the city council. As with everything, there's and I say, we've got 50,000 people in the city. There's no way for me to make them all happy.
Right.
So, we make our recommendations. We ensure people know why, being transparent on that, and then just move forward. The city council ultimately did approve what we recommended. There were a lot of people who came up and spoke for it, and there were people who came up and spoke against it. We had also a lot of sidewalks that were constructed as part of this project. Which
y'all know how great that is.
Yeah, and get
Sidewalks?
into the trees and
sidewalks were and we could have a whole
Episode on that,
episode on sidewalks. So you either love them or hate them, and
and you can love them and hate them in front of your of your house
as long as they're on the other side of the street.
Yeah.
But it worked out great. I really think that was a great success. The council, I mentioned earlier, our council is extremely supportive and likes us to try things. And they thought this was even to the point where they said, why don't we pilot this? They'll actually, we did another pilot project for a protected bikeway. So we've done 3 or 4 of these now where we've piloted things and then collected data and then made recommendations based on it. And I think it's that proof is in the pudding for the public, proof is in the pudding for data, for even for public works. And the people who have, like I said, we build things, engineering builds things that they have to maintain. How do we make it right? How do we build it right the first time instead of spending a lot of money and then having to tear it out?
Was this your first, like, I mean, it's kind of a compact roundabout, but a neighborhood traffic circle? Was that your first one?
Very first.
Did you have a lot of concerns from Public Works about maintenance, plowing, blah, blah, blah?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we would have done it a little different. One of the things that we should have done differently is we should have had no parking within 20, 25, 30 feet of the intersection. That's any future traffic circle, that's what we do. Just because when you look at a plow, well, first of all, the hard thing about piloting is you can't move the curbs. And so we had to move that circle so it was easier, but the curbs are still where they're at. Mm-hmm. And we had a problem with the Fern Hill pilot because of that. We did another pilot project a couple of years ago. But when you actually build it, you can make those curbs, the radius on the curb bigger. And so we did that, and that worked out well for Public Works. But this whole idea of the plows being able to get in and around, if there's a car parked right, in the wrong place, it's a challenge.
Yep.
So
you mentioned piloting this to other types of projects, but what you did here, how did you apply that to other neighborhoods? Like, what did you learn from this? What did you maybe evolve out of it into other neighborhoods?
What we learned is the parking that I just brought up. What we learned is to be very clear that the stop signs are being removed as a part of the pilot and they're being replaced with the yield signs.
Wow.
That was something that was a sensitive topic with the community when we did these pilots. What we also learned with this one is perhaps doing a better job of mimicking a traffic circle, which is why we adapted with having the silt socks. For the second one. What else do we learn? I think it's a good way to try things is one thing we really absolutely learned. So, yeah. But applying the other ones we've done, and again, we don't automatically come in with a traffic management pilot project. That first step is listening. And so the very next year, the next project, we didn't hear anything about traffic concerns. So these sorts of cut through traffic, or it was just the usual people are speeding, the usual I need a stop sign at this intersection. So we didn't do one the following year, and we didn't do one the next year either, because we didn't hear the same types of concerns from the community. So fast forward to 2020, it was 2020, right after the pandemic. We actually took a year off because we wanted to try to do a pilot project. So we knew this neighborhood, we knew what their concerns were. We knew we wanted to do a pilot. And one of the things that Elmwood had going for it is that it had sidewalks in a lot of places.
Yeah.
I mean, there are places where we needed to fill gaps, et cetera, but there was a sidewalks in a lot of places. The next neighborhood we went to, there were streets without sidewalks anywhere. And it was in our Orthodox Jewish community. And we did the same process where we listened, where people cut through traffic speeding, people not stopping at stop signs. So we put in 9 temporary traffic circles and ran the same, but it was a grid system. So that didn't grid. We ran the same process, but what we found was a completely different situation. People were walking in the street because there's no sidewalk.
Right.
And so because of that, the drivers were not yielding. We put yield signs up, and they were not paying attention to pedestrians at these intersections. And the people were walking in the street. And so it was a very, we actually, it snowed too. We cut the pilot short. Mm-hmm. And did not recommend any, because we didn't see any change in behavior. And actually, we saw increases in speeds. So again,
wow, weird.
I know. Well, and that was the shocking thing. But I think that it's so context sensitive, and that's the strength of doing a pilot is that first and foremost, what we have a philosophy when it comes to traffic calming, and I'm sure this is, industry wide. By doing this, you can't create a problem over there.
Right.
And so pilots are so strong because then you can measure. and see if you're going to create a problem somewhere else or create a problem you didn't anticipate because there's not sidewalks.
Right.
So that pilot project, we ended up the only things we did some bump-ins at intersections to reduce the pedestrian crossing width. But aside from that, we didn't implement anything on that project. So the only other pilot that we have done is the Bollard protected bikeway. And that was, we had that in place for 6 months and did a whole public outreach and all of the above. That one got vandalized.
Oh,
We had people pulling the bollards out and laying them very nicely in the in the boulevard. But we learned from that they were too close to the intersection. So these were temporarily installed. So we reinstalled them, so that was a great way to, we thought we made all the turning movements and the sight lines. We thought it was right. But by doing that, we heard from the community through action that perhaps they were in the wrong place.
did you want to say something?
I want to transition a little bit. Deb, I know you've been using streetlight data and some of the big data sources, and I think that's a great evolution we should all be tracking. Can be expensive to tap into, but the Minnesota Department of Transportation, I believe you're in under their contract, so that reduces the price quite a bit.
Oh, it's worth every penny.
So tell us how you're using it. Would you have done Elmwood? I mean, would you have been able to tap into that data source and not put out all these counters?
So big data is, all joking aside, we use Streetlight a lot. And it has really helped. We used to, if we had a stop sign request, we'd actually hire a consultant and have them go out and do traffic counts. And it was just something we did because we just really felt we wanted to take it seriously, and it was speed data and whatever the case may be. At the end of the day, on a local road, the warrant analysis for a 28th in Princeton, it's not that important. It's not that different. So we started using, so once we had an opportunity to join up with Streetlight, what happened is we were looking at regional traffic, and this was an opportunity. And so we decided to sign on.
What is Streetlight?
Oh, okay. Streetlight is a big data application that we subscribe to annually. Mm-hmm. And Streetlight uses cell phone data. That's, it's all anonymous. So we don't know Mark Culver drove down this street on that day. It's all anonymous. And it can collect traffic. It can collect trucks. It can collect bikes and pets. It's been around, we've been members we've been subscribing since 2019, but I think it's been around for longer than that. I don't know how long it's been around, but yeah. So they run their data through the algorithms. And you can get, on any given street segment, you can set up boundaries using GIS. You can see origin destination. So you can say, and we did this as a part of the Fern Hill traffic management. Anyway, as a part of the traffic management thing.
Hang on. Pause.
Oh, no, I'm not. See, I announced it, so I'm not going to.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to get it all over this.
No,
So one of the big concerns was how many people are cutting through the neighborhood. And you can set up boundaries around a certain fences, and say any car that is here and then comes out here is cut through. Any car that starts inside this fence is not cut through. Mm-hmm. And that is powerful.
Yeah.
Think about what it would take to do an OD study.
Right.
Origin destination.
I've done it. But, yeah.
And you have to do license plates. And we did one back in 2001 for Excelsior area. It cost in 2001, it cost $120,000. So it's extremely powerful for that sort of thing. To see, who has business here, who doesn't.
So the technology, they're tapping into the different cell phone carriers, and also some car models are pinging off signals too as the cars are getting more connected. So they're tapping into those anonymized data sets, and they can track. Part of the issue is it's a sampling. So they do not have 100% of cars, 100% of people, 100% of bicycles. And
right.
They make assumption based on how fast is that cell phone moving. Yeah. And that's how they break it down to walking versus bicycling versus car. but it is a sample, and you can tap into historical or to nearly today's data. So you can look at months worth of data, not just a couple of days worth of data. So there's some sampling issues if there isn't a lot of traffic in a neighborhood with the origin destination. The cell phone signal may get lost. So you can't say it's 100% accurate going through, but you can start to get patterns.
And getting back to, so we recognize, so the one thing, and you brought this up, the one thing with streetlight and this is a white paper that MnDOT put together, is that when you have less than, I believe, I don't remember the thresholds, but if you have a lower volume street, I'm just going to say it that way, it is not as accurate. So I think the threshold's either 2,000 or 5,000. I forget the number. So a lot of times when you look at a local road, the count data is perhaps inaccurate. And they, fully acknowledge that, and it's part of the white papers. But when you look at, highways, and actually MnDOT in some places are moving to just using these for their counts, their larger roads. But for us, how we use it is we used it. We were looking to do local option sales tax. We were going to go to the legislature to ask for the enabling legislation to be able to go forward with a local option sales tax for some regional roads. And we use streetlight data to develop how many people that are on this road don't live in St. Louis Park.
Right.
And the roadways were Louisiana, Cedar Lake Road, Oxford. They're our MSA system, and we could have a whole nother podcast on funding. At the end of the day, we don't have enough money to build our MSA system. We're using gas tax dollars. So we're optimistic that we're going to have more.
Municipal state aid system. We're going to have listeners around the world. So it's just part of the gas tax system in Minnesota. But these are local city streets that are collectors.
That are collectors, yes.
But they're carrying sometimes volumes that more than neighboring county roads.
We've got some streets that are collectors, and actually there are arterials that have 16,000 and 20,000 vehicles a day that we receive a portion of the state's gas tax to rebuild. We're simply saying that we don't get enough of it. So
I will second that.
Yes.
We don't get nearly enough.
$10.79 per $1,000 in needs.
And that number has gone down every year. But anyway, different podcast.
And we were going to move forward. So local option sales tax, you've got to prove the regional benefit. And what we found using this data is that these roads were carrying between 60 and 70% of non-city, and we were looking at rebuilding the roads using our actual general levy dollars. Because there's no other way to rebuild them. We weren't getting enough money, and they're not in good shape, and they're very hostile for bikes and peds. And so that was their transit cord, all of the above. So we used that, and actually just recently reused that data to put forward a bonding request. And we're right now doing a process, because we're going to be putting together another bonding request for another road, and we're going to be using streetlight data to determine the regional nature.
And one of in my opinion, the strongest area. So this big data is amazing for getting trends of travel times. How long does it take to go 2 miles? Because you don't need that many cars to have statistically significant. You only need a handful of cars during rush hour to say, hey, we're slowing down significantly.
Well, and I'll switch back. I went down this regional path and went shiny object on y'all, but we actually use it to do our traffic warrants now. Our intersection warrants.
Wow.
Because when you look at it, if you're looking at a lower volume, it's not as accurate. I'm not using it to do, this is how many vehicles are on the road. I'm looking at it. So of this intersection, what are the legs and how do they compare to each other?
Yeah.
So if you're looking at the data and you're comparing data to data, does it meet, are the legs similar? Are they the same? How many vehicles go through here? And we've been pretty successful with that. As far as just doing a simple review, we've also taken a look at speeds using it, but the speeds are usually brackets, and that's another thing that we're not as. So as far as these pilots are concerned, I wouldn't use streetlight for them, because most of the roads that we're doing the pilots on are like
you just don't have enough.
Less than 1,000 vehicles. Yeah, and I can't say that before I had 1,000 vehicles, after I had 700 or whatever.
So if you're not using streetlight data in those circumstances, like in the future, Like, what are you going to use? I mean, are you going to continue to use tube counts?
Well, we've been using cameras
Okay.
more recently.
Let's talk about that.
Well, cameras are really cool because, and so just kind of building on this, tubes are great, but have you ever had a street sweeper drive across a tube?
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
And we had a situation where actually a car got a nail in their tire.
Oh, wow.
I'd never seen it before, and the group we were working with had never seen it before either. So, and they come loose in the heat and everything else. Cameras are really cool also because you can see behaviors. I brought this up before. We would not have seen that pedestrian interaction at those intersections at Fern Hill if we hadn't used cameras.
Mm-hmm.
We saw some stuff, and just even some other drivers, it's one thing to say this is how many cars. It's another thing to say, oh my goodness, what's going on here?
So talk about how you're using the cameras. Like what cameras are you using, how you're using it, and how are you analyzing the data?
Well, I can't say what cameras I'm using. We actually consult all this out.
That's fine.
Yeah. We had a company that we went to quite for everything. And we've been trying to find that next niche. Lately, we've been using Alliant to do a lot of our traffic counting. So in Bolton & Mank has done some work for us, and they are actually helping us out with our counts this year, or counts 2 years ago. In Fern Hill, they got those.
So are these firms just putting video cameras up and then they're post-processing the data somehow?
Right.
It's my understanding.
So Deb's tap dancing around. So I recently sold my company. That was SPAC Solutions, but we developed CountCam cameras and technology for this purpose. And Alliant, Bolton & Mank, many companies across the country and even the world use the CountCams. And the amazing thing about video is you have that record. You can go back, you can scroll through at 30 times speed.
Yep.
To spend an hour looking at a day's worth of video to really get the traffic patterns and to see those near misses and to see the pedestrian, bicycle, the multimodal interactions. That's definitely where the profession, I hope, is heading.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I've been working on for the last 10 years.
So just to kind of blow that up a little bit, so you developed this CountCam system, so it's video. Do you still have like a human that's counting it?
Yes.
Or so you're watching the video at an accelerated speed, and you're counting, you're doing whatever, you're tracking the pedestrians or the vehicles or the trucks or whatever that you want to on a board. Do you see that? Well, what do you see the future of that?
Yes, it's definitely. There's a company, MyoVision, that uses machine learning, machine vision, artificial intelligence to break down, to do the transcription, but the human brain is still better at it. So they still have human intervention, is my understanding.
Yep.
The SPAC Solutions methodology was people watching 100% of the videos and watching it at fast forward speed. We are very close to lots of artificial intelligence, machine learning tools being able to do this and being able to do it for pennies. Just the whole world of video and big data, it's all exploding. And you can see that in NVIDIA's stock prices exploding this last quarter. So it's going to be there. And it's, if you're putting tube counts out 5 years from now, I think you're wasting money, but you're also putting people in harm's way.
Yeah.
That the video cameras can capture that same data.
But also the other elegance we hired Bolton & Mank last year in the winter to collect data.
Yes.
So, and I think that was huge, is because you can't put tubes out in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
And doing this stuff. And so that was great. But I will say one thing. The one thing we learned when we did that data collection, we did it on a frontage road directly adjacent to Highway 100. And you've got to zero in. We were getting speed data. When you've got literally a frontage road that's 5 feet from the highway, you've got to zero that in when it comes to video, because we had some previous data collection for speeds, and we think they were picking up the highway. We had 85th percentile speeds in like the 50s.
Yes.
And when Bolton & Mank, credit to the company, when they realized that they were just getting these stupid fast speeds, they zeroed it in, and we found that data was just bad.
Yeah.
And the average speeds were more along the lines of 30, which is what it's posted.
Right.
So, again, AI is important, but sometimes it just takes the operator.
Right. And I think that's a great lesson for anything that we do within AI, with the explosion of Chat GPT and all these other AI web services now. You can't just, it's kind of like the whole Wikipedia thing.
Yeah.
We have the same conversations with our kids that were researching stuff. You can't just take whatever is out there as truth. You have to look at it. You have to look at it with an educated eye and make sure that it makes sense.
So yeah, I think I answered the question. And so of course, I am not an expert on the technology. I just know that this is how we use it.
Yeah.
This is what we use it for. And I think the pilot projects, I definitely, if we can start getting AI, that'd be great. The other thing I'm just going to say is, from a bike ped perspective, one of our things we're working on right now is our city council. We had that Connect the Park, which is the 30 miles of bikeways. We want to develop trends for that. And so we've been trying to work through, how do we develop a counting program for bikes and peds? But the council even wants to know who's using it. So is it a child? Is it a male or female? Just so we can kind of understand the demographics of, we built a bikeway. Is it build it, they will come?
Right.
But who are we serving? How have we increased? Because our city council has a climate action plan, and the idea is to create an easier way for people to get around town, not using single occupancy vehicles. So that's what what our Connect the Park is all about. And we haven't solved that yet. We've been talking about doing video counts for that, and then actually having someone say, appears to be female, or having that be part of it. But AI would be awesome for something like that.
Yeah.
And AI, for good, for bad, for scary.
Yeah.
We'll get closer and closer there. And also, Myovision has rolled out, they acquired a company that developed AI technology around near misses. And I think that is also an important data set that, we collected the data we could cost effectively over the last century. And now that the tools are getting cheaper and cheaper, we can start looking at more refined data. Because if we find in a neighborhood these near misses are going up tenfold, it is a very reasonable straight line for us to say our exposure for something bad has increased 10 times.
We actually made a decision. So we had an intersection at Park Commons in Monterey that was a full access intersection, and we had a development coming in across the street, and we would often get complaints and concerns. It was difficult to take a left. It's only 200 feet away from the Excelsior intersection. And we had a new development coming in. We were looking at it. We were like, well, what should we do? And we did we did a traffic study done by SRF, and we had a couple options. And then they showed us the video. There was 3 instances, I think, of these kids trying to cross the intersection, and the cars just ignoring them.
Oh my God.
So we just said, you know what? This needs to be a 3/4.
Yeah.
This can't be a left out, because people were focusing so hard
To find that gap. They didn't see anything else.
They didn't see the kids trying to cross the street. So we were, I was like, well, should we? But we finally just said, from a safety perspective, we want this to be more walkable. It was right near Excelsior and Grand. Trader Joe's is right there. We just said, this is what we need to do. And so that's what that video is so powerful about. It was not only collecting the data, but seeing that near miss, which unless there's an accident report, you don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Right.
And Mike and I talked a little bit about this on our previous podcast. But at a recent conference that I was at, there was so much conversation about AI, and there was a lot of conversation about the very thing you were talking about, is using AI in the tools, whether it's video or LiDAR or some other technology to collect the data, but that post-processing and finding things, letting AI like dive in there and find things that we're probably not going to see, because you can only look at it so many hours of video as a human being. And so it's just really, as you think about the potential for that, to record everything else that you're not seeing in the future, and how it can help you make some really good decisions so that something like that doesn't happen.
Yep.
So you're not responding to a fatality at some point. Well, we've talked a lot about, we have our standard ending questions. about technology, and we've talked a lot about technology in that, but I guess, just kind of opening it up to you outside of maybe even traffic counting and that, but, where have you really seen technology make a huge impact in the profession, in your career, I guess?
Oh my. Where have I seen? So in my career, to be honest with you, there are certain things that just seem so pedestrian for people, so basic, but just Google Street View.
Yeah. Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Like that changed things. Like
Game changer.
Right. Instead of having to get in your car, go drive around, see what's going on, you could just, I see exactly what you're talking about.
And even to the point where what we do for a project, we hire a company and they drive our projects.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have, data before, like literally, sometimes those are 5-10 years old. But we have the data right before the project. And so that, while we're in the winter designing, we can actually have this was just driven in November.
Yep.
So that's awesome. The other one is interactive comment maps. GIS, just what is our go-to now. The pandemic did a lot to really have us pivot in how we engage the public. Think about all the times for the audience, when I have a meeting prior to the pandemic, it was always, we're going to have a meeting, come to City Hall. Right. It's an open house. There's a presentation. There's a facilitator, whatever the case may be. And you send out 900 letters. You bring cookies and you've got 10 staff there and 5 people show up.
You're right.
And with the pandemic, we started doing things virtually, and then we'd tape them and then we put them on our websites. And so people could get them whenever they wanted. We've had 40, 50 people just join virtually. And we still we've still done the in-house open houses. We've done pop-up events. We've done a lot of those things. But when you look at just that virtual, and then the other great things, remember that design charrette I talked about for Elmwood? We put up this interactive map, and it's the first thing we do with the public. And we send out a little postcard with a QR code that says, please go look at our interactive map. And people can go there and say traffic, and a little, click on the map, stop sign here, pedestrian crossing there, drainage issue there. And it's a great way that people can just sit at home at their own time, and we get hundreds of comments on these.
What's that software package you're using currently?
It depends. So we've got a couple consultants we've used. It's a public input ID, and then I forget the name.
Social pinpoint.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's effectively a GIS based, and it's just how it's interact. The one that we're using for this year's pavement management really like, because not only can you make a comment, you can originate a task or a dot on the map, but other people can comment on it too. Thumbs up, thumbs down, so you can see,
which can be scary.
Which can be, But we just actually met yesterday on the traffic management portion of it, because we were trying to decide if we were going to do a pilot project, and we are, but not traffic circles. Looking at it, we were able to drill down. These are the ones that the most people were really commenting on. And these are the ones that we can actually affect. There's pedestrian crossings, crosswalk issues. There's a couple intersections that are really weird, for lack of a better, it's my technical term. How can we narrow those up, make them more intuitive? So those are the technologies that I focus on. And then I can't speak enough about this, and I know it's not necessarily high tech, but I call it big sign technology. We've had some of the best success with our Fern Hill project. I keep referencing this is our 2021 pavement management street reconstruction project. We just simply made a 8.5 by 11, or it was 11 by 17, laminated, and it said sidewalk proposed with a QR code. Plopped it in the boulevard.
Oh, I can only imagine the comments you're going to get out of that.
Well, so people just take a picture of the QR code and go to the website, sign up for our updates. We had 1,700 people signed up for our newsletter before the project even started.
That's great.
And, everybody knew there was a sidewalk proposed because they were out in the street. It was out there. We also have a process, or what we do is we will, Cedar Lake Road in Louisiana, we put giant construction signs out there, Cedar Lake Road project coming. And there we had a QR code as well as a bit.ly. And again, we've had just great success getting people to sign up and just having it out on the street. Those road projects haven't even started yet. So we know it's not high tech.
I just, I kind of want to add a little comment on what you're talking about as far as what we're doing differently post-pandemic. And I think from an accessibility perspective and an inclusive perspective on just being open to these virtual meetings now, and even our council meetings, allowing people to participate virtually in council meetings. And I wish we would change our open meeting laws so that, appointed officials and elected officials could participate remotely too, because, you want to be inclusive. You talk about inclusivity, but somebody's at home with, they're a single parent at home. Well, I can't be a city council member because I can't commit to being at City Hall at 7:00 on a Monday night because I got to take care of my kid. And so open it up. There's no reason these antiquated rules and laws that we have on things, we need to change those things. And this is a Minnesota thing. I would imagine it's the same in a lot of other states, but it is encouraging to see how in our profession, in our government setting, we are just allowing people to participate in these things remotely. And we're getting a lot more really good feedback because of that. So,
and I will give another plug. We actually, at the end of the day, when people come and talk to us about our projects, they want to talk about what's happening with this project.
Yeah.
They want to talk about what's happening in front of their house. We put together a video now for both our road reconstruction projects and our alley reconstruction projects that we just put on the webpage, and that's another thing we send out. If you're interested in what the process is like, what to expect during construction, here's the video. Because then we don't spend the time during those public meetings talking about this generic, and the garbage does this, and the mailboxes get moved, and you can't drive on your driveway for 7 days. We again focus on, we're building sidewalks, we're doing water main. What are you concerned about in front of your house or in front of your property? So.
Well, this has been fantastic.
It's been great.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mike.
And one last thing before you go, although we don't charge for the PDHs you just received by listening to this podcast, the Public Works Nerds is not free. If you've listened to more than one episode, the cost to you is that you tell one colleague about the podcast to help us grow our audience. Thank you.
Thanks to all our listeners, and thanks, Tony, our producer.